We're currently getting ready to cross the Indian Ocean, and that's going to be 3,000 miles from Indonesia to the Seychelles. And although it's our third ocean crossing, it's actually going to be our second ever biggest passage. The last time that we did a big passage like this was direct from Panama to the Marquesas, which took us a month.
Yeah, this one's probably going to take us a month as well, even though it's slightly shorter because there's light winds. But we need to get Florence ready because we're going to be out thousands of miles away from land and miles away from any help. So we need to make sure that Florence is ready for that. For something like this, we go through her with a fine-tooth comb from the top of the mast down to the bottom of the bilges. And we thought we'd share this with you, what we've been doing pretty much over the last month, getting her ready for this next passage.
Yeah. To prepare for an ocean crossing like this, we'd normally situate ourselves somewhere close to a marina and chandleries, and also somewhere that we could get parts delivered online, but that's not possible in this part of Indonesia, so we're just going to have to go with what we have on board and working between the two of us to complete the work ourselves. Forgotten how difficult it was to get to, sorry. We are Matt and Amy, and together with our 37-foot yacht Florence, we are circumnavigating the world and sharing our adventure along the way.
Before any long passage, we always need to check the rig. It's something we actually do regularly anyway, but we do a special check before any big passages like we're about to take on. So for that, we check it at deck level, we check all the bottle screws, we check all the pins, but we also have to go up the top of the mast and we check every pin, every split ring, any points for any wear and tear, and check for any broken strands in the rigging. To be honest, if we find anything out here, I'm not sure what we'll do to get it fixed, but the first thing is to find out if we've got any problems. You might wonder why we don't get a professional rigger in to check the rig. Well, obviously we can't get one here. And when we did speak to a professional rigger back in New Zealand, he advised us that we were better off doing a regular rig check ourselves than just getting a rigger in to check the rig once per year, because what we're looking for is any change over time. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to check the forestay because it all goes up inside this furling unit, and without dismantling that you can't get inside to see what's going on. So you kind of just have to hope. I don't think there's an easier way of checking it. What we do on Florence, we can check all the rest of the rigging, but luckily on Florence we've got an inner forestay, so as long as we've got that on, if we did have a problem with this when we're out at sea, the mast wouldn't fall down. So that's why we always put the inner forestay on when we get any rough weather or we're going on a really long passage.
Sailing is so glamorous. I am absolutely dripping in sweat and covered in bilge grime. I am cleaning out under all of the floorboards, so cleaning out all of the bilges. I just want to make sure that if we do get any water coming in at any point, that the little holes that it flows through don't block up, and also that there's no hair and all of the other disgusting things that tend to congregate under your floorboards, so that they don't block the bilge pump as well.
That's in case we hit something and get a hole and have a leak, and we don't want the bilge pump to clog up and cause us to have more of a problem.
Yeah, obviously that only works if we're taking on water slow enough to deal with it, but it gives us a much better chance. So
one of the things that's really useful to have when we're crossing oceans and doing a lot of night sailing is a light for the cockpit, and especially a red light. Now we don't have a red light at the moment, we've got a white one, but it's pretty old. We fitted it back in the Caribbean, and although it's supposed to be waterproof, the water has got into it and half of the LEDs don't work anymore. So there's no chandleries or places that we could buy a nice red waterproof cockpit light here in Indonesia. But luckily Marco here at Cubidac, he had some waterproof LED strip, and he's got a little processor to control the strip, and you can have different colours on it. And so he's made us a little box.
he's even labelled it for us.
Yeah, proper professional job with a 3D printed box. And I'm just routing it in so that we'll hopefully have a nice red cockpit light for sailing across the Indian Ocean. Where we've now got the red cockpit light, it's going to be much better for doing manoeuvres at night because it's right over all the winches and the clutches that we use for putting reefs in, which is normally what we have to do at night, because that's when we normally get a squall. And the previous cockpit light, A, it was white, so we didn't want to use it at night because it destroys our night vision, and B, it was way too far back, so when you're working here you just cast a shadow. So hopefully this will be a great improvement. So this is now our new switch for the cockpit light. We can either have red or white, but red always comes on first, just in case it's at night. We don't want to accidentally put the white on and destroy our night vision. Well, that works pretty well. Great.
I've checked through some of the skin fittings. We can't obviously service the seacocks, but some of them we're lucky we can actually grease them whilst we're still in the water. So I've had a good look at those, make sure that they're still working, and grease the ones that I can.
Seacocks are the shut-off valves that we have on all of the holes in the hull, like the drains for the sinks and the water inlet for the engine cooling.
I've also been checking that we have a bung attached to each seacock just in case it breaks, and that the double hose clamps holding each pipe on are secure to prevent leaks. Sorry. Whilst Matt was in the lazarette, I just asked him to grease one of the seacocks because we obviously have to empty everything out in order to get that one. But I'd forgotten how difficult it was to get to, sorry.
Yeah, just to get to the seacock you can get to really easily, which as you need to in case of emergency, but the grease nipple for the seacock points the wrong way. So in order to get at it, I've had to dismantle everything and take the autopilot apart so that I can get room to get the grease gun in there and grease it. But that's life on a boat. Normally you have to dismantle a whole bunch of things to get at the thing you want. But I've done that and it's now runs much smoother. It was a little bit stiff before. And I've re-greased all of everything to do with the steering system, so hopefully that'll be good for the passage. We haven't had a problem with it, touch wood, but it's always good to give it a bit of love before a long trip. We desperately need some new anti-foul on the bottom of Florence, but we can't do that because we can't haul Florence out here. No travel lifts that are safe to use. So the only thing we can actually anti-foul is the servo rudder for the self-steering. And we've got a tiny bit of paint left from Australia, so we're going to slap that on this, and at least one part of Florence under the water won't get covered in weed on the way over to the Seychelles. This beast actually has steered Florence across all the ocean passages we've done. No electrical power whatsoever, completely mechanical and powered by the wind. Putting the servo rudder on feels like we're really properly getting ready to go offshore sailing. Because we've just been doing day hops around in Indonesia here, we actually took this off to stop it getting covered in weed. Because we've got an electric autopilot, which we had to renew in Tello, as you might have seen in the video, because it broke. But we can't use the electric autopilot offshore because we don't have enough power to run it all night.
In the spirit of checking things, we need to check our emergency tiller.
Yep, that needs sticking back on. If that's the only problem we got, then I'm happy.
Excellent, that works. Put this back in the cockpit locker so it's ready in case we do have an emergency.
Servicing the engine isn't necessarily something we do for crossing an ocean, but you'd always check it over. But we've got to the point, it's been a year and 200 engine hours, so it needs a service before we go anyway, but it's a good thing to do. It's always a bit fiddly getting around the engine in boat engine bays. Oh, there we go. That's the oil filter off. Now the next thing to see is if the oil filter I've got to replace it actually fits. It's not quite as easy as normally when you go to a car parts place. You give them the registration number of your car, they know what engine's in it and they know what the right parts are. So you end up having to look around and get the specs off the internet. Before, where I was promised in one car parts place that was the right one and that was the equivalent, and it showed it online that it was the equivalent, and it turned out to be the wrong one. So we've managed to buy some in Indonesia here, and we'll find out if these ones are the right ones in a minute, if they spin on. Looks like we're onto a winner. I don't like coming into the engine bay. I feel a bit nervous that I'm going to break something whenever I touch anything. There's one tip for sailing a boat around the world. It's that you've got to do all the maintenance yourself or understand how to do it all yourself. And if before you leave, when you've got access to all the experts and stuff, If there's an area that you're not comfortable with, then I would very much recommend getting some advice, getting someone to take you through it all, so that you've got more confidence when you're out doing it yourself in remote areas. Now, I always worry about the tightening of these. One of the boats we were with in Isolation Bay changed his oil filter, and obviously hadn't tightened it up quite enough, and it leaked. And he had a secondary problem with his instrumentation, so his oil alarm, or his oil pressure alarm, didn't sound, and so he ended up seizing his whole engine. So it's just a reminder that if it goes wrong, you're really stuffed out here. But yeah.
The strong ultraviolet light in the tropics attacks cloth and thread. So here we are resewing a lot of the seams on our bimini, which was made for us back in England by my stepdad. After 5 years of sailing in the tropics, the thread has disintegrated in the sun. Thankfully our sails and sail covers are still new from Rolly Tasker in Thailand, so we don't have to resew them yet. Using a speedy stitcher tool, we work like two halves of a sewing machine. We could take this cover off and get a local tailor to run over the stitching for us, but to do that we'd have to remove the solar panels which are on top of the bimini. So even though it's slow to sew this by hand, it's still quicker in the long run. Our bimini will probably need replacing once we reach South Africa though.
Got a really modern fuel gauge on Florence. Trusty stick. See how much we've got. Just above number 3. So before we set off across the ocean, we really want to be as full of fuel as we can. Even though we're a sailing boat, we don't want to use the fuel, but especially for this trip, as we'll see when we go through the planning, there's not much wind at the start. And we've got a 3,000 mile trip, and we can carry enough fuel to do a maximum of 500 of those miles. So we have to find wind we can sail in, but we want to take as much fuel as possible just in case there's little wind. But it's not quite as easy as it would be back if you had a marina to pull alongside a fuel dock. Here we've got to go and get it all in jerry cans on a motorbike, about 15 minutes drive from where we can take the dinghy in. So we're really happy that we don't use very much fuel, and we can pretty much do this in one trip.
It's actually illegal for us to buy the diesel fuel which is widely available in Indonesia, known locally as solar, because it's subsidised by the government. Thankfully at this fuel station we can buy the premium stuff, which still only costs 50 pence per litre, but is far cleaner and better for our engine, so we prefer it anyway. It's also good to get a receipt so that we can prove that we bought the legal stuff.
Okay, terima kasih. Sometimes the fuel here in Indonesia can be a little bit dirty, so we siphon it out of the jerry cans and through an extra filter here, which should remove any nastiness, and also it's hydrophobic, so it should remove any water.
Before we leave, we need to refill our cooking gas, but in order to do that, we need to head ashore.
Right, ready?
Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah.
These are US or Australian, New Zealand style bottles. They don't have the right fittings to fill here in Indonesia, so we have to rig up this system by hoisting a local bottle into the tree and making up an adapter kit. Don't do this at home. We carry 4 of these gas bottles on board. We use about 1 per month, so you only really need 1 full for crossing the ocean. But of course, when we get to the Seychelles, we've got to work out how we get them filled, whether we have to make up a new adapter kit or something. So we tend to work by the more we've got on board that are full, the better. Then we can just go for longer before we have to go and work out how to get them filled.
I'm just cleaning out and rearranging all of our cupboards because when we're at sea I want easy access to all of the foods, a bit easier to cook, and I don't want to be rooting around in lots of different cupboards to find everything. But also when we're at sea, everything in the cupboards just gets shaken around, and things tend to, if they're not wedged properly, they tend to either break or fall over and spill. I try to keep everything in, like the sauce bottles and things, in separate containers, and make sure that there's not glass next to each other so that it's not constantly... My biggest bugbear at sea is hearing something clinking or clanging in a cupboard when I'm trying to get to sleep. So hopefully we won't have that issue.
As well as getting Florence ready and trying to do everything we can to make sure we don't have a problem when crossing this ocean, we also need to prepare for the worst. For example, if we hit a submerged shipping container, put a big hole in Florence and she was sinking and we have to abandon her. So we've got a life raft, which is in the cockpit. And next to that, we've got some barrels with some emergency water in that we can just quickly grab if we have to jump into the life raft. And we also have a grab bag with all the kind of essentials that we need in that life raft. We're going to be potentially thousands of miles from rescue. The life raft has some basic provisions in it, but we could be a long time before any form of rescue gets to us. So we also need to have some extra provisions available to take with us into the life raft.
This is all stuff that we've had on board for obviously a long period of time, so we're just going through it to refamiliarise ourselves with what we have and also make sure that nothing has expired. So anything that's electrical, making sure that all the batteries and things are okay and that's working, and that any of our spare food is also okay. If we were to have to abandon Florence at sea, the first thing that we would do would be to make a mayday call on our VHF radio. So right next to our radio, just in case if a situation arose that we panicked and forgot what we were supposed to be doing, we've got a laminated list that we've made up, which not only says the order of priority for what we would need to do, but where each bit of safety equipment is kept on the boat, so that if we do forget where something is, we can just work our way through this list.
This is our EPIRB, which is an emergency beacon to call for help if we need help from the Coast Guard for any reason, for example if we're sinking. And it's got a built-in battery, and it's got a self-test capability, which you have to do within the first 5 minutes of the hour, which it is now. So we'll just check it. Cool, that works. Checking the life jackets is something we do once a year anyway, but we always do it again before any major trip. So open them all up, check that the gas bottles aren't all corroded. Triggers are all in date because these are hydrostatic ones, so they'll automatically inflate if we fall in the water. The water will set them off. Got these AIS units which will automatically again also get set off if we fall into the water, and that sends a signal to our chart plotter, so we get an AIS position, and we think that's the best for us crossing the oceans because we're out way far away from any rescue, that the best chance of rescue if you fall overboard is the other person back on board Florence. There's a bunch of checks you can do on these to send a test signal that we can check they're actually working, and then what we'll also do is just inflate these and inflate them by blowing into them, not by pulling the trigger, and make sure that they stay inflated overnight just to make sure we haven't got any leaks. I already know that the lights in these ones have failed since we left the UK. Here we can't get any spares very easily. I've actually just taken the lights off of the spare life jackets that we have for guests and put them onto these life jackets to make sure that everything's working on the ones that we wear. These are deteriorating. We can do some new life jackets, but not yet. These will last us till we get home. These life jackets also have a built-in harness, which, as long as we wear the crotch straps, which we always do, allows us to safely hook onto the boat. And I think the spring on that clip needs replacing. Other than that, all good.
So the next job is to clean the hull. We last did this in the Mentawai Islands about 3 weeks ago, but already the weed has grown back. We normally do this by snorkeling, so diving down under our own breath, but Marco here has lent us some scuba kit today, so we're going to try and see if it's easier to do it with scuba kit.
It took us 2 hours of intense hard work to clean the hull using the scuba kit. That is faster than doing it by snorkeling, but only because we save the time coming up for air every minute or two. To do it snorkeling when it's that bad probably takes us 4 hours. However, we are just as tired after doing it with scuba gear as we would have been snorkeling. We cannot wait to haul out and get some fresh anti-foul on so we no longer have to do this every couple of weeks. Just when we thought we were nearly through the whole jobs list and other big jobs appeared. We had a really big downpour of rain a couple of nights ago, and suddenly we had leaks on these two windows on this side. Now, thankfully we do have some sealant we bought to reseal them. It's not the stuff that we would buy back home in the UK, but it's something we could get out here because we actually had the same problem on the starboard side about 6 months ago up in Isolation Bay, and we had to do this. But this side wasn't leaking at all, so we didn't really want to touch it, but we did thankfully buy enough sealant. So today we need to remove both windows and reseal them back in, which we know will take us pretty much all day because it's a horrible job. It's never simple, as a few of these screws have snapped off, so I'm going to have to try and either drill them out or get the end out somehow, and hope I've got enough spare screws on board, because of course we cannot go to a joinery.
This end? Yeah, you ready? Yeah. Nothing. Yeah, okay. It still feels like it's sealed here. Okay. We've got to break the seal before we can push the window out and then clean up all of the sealant so that we can reseal it. If the windows leak when it rains, then they're definitely going to leak when a big wave hits them when we're at sea. So this is a very important job to get fixed. Oh, that's out.
Yeah. Okay.
Well done. Tea?
Tea deliveries. Makes life easier. Can't do a job without tea. Proper British workman. This is the worst stage, cleaning up afterwards. It's incredibly mucky stuff, and you've got to put so much in to make sure that it actually squeezes out everywhere so that we don't have a leak. But see what it looks like when we eventually take the masking tape off, but this takes ages.
On to the second window. It's 3:30 and we've got 3 hours before it's dark to get this one back in and cleaned up. I think we'll make it.
Yeah, we just need to pray that there's no thunderstorms and lots of rain before this stuff goes off.
They look really good, I think. We managed to get them in just in time last night, and luckily it didn't rain. We don't normally film boat jobs like this because we're normally trying to blitz through them as quickly as possible and not add the extra time of filming, as we just want to go sailing. But in the next video we're going to share with you something that we think is more interesting, which is how we've gone about passage planning for our 3,000-mile Indian Ocean passage to the Seychelles, and also how we've gone about provisioning for that, which is potentially a month at sea. We want to say a huge thank you to everybody who supported us, either via the PayPal link on our website or via Patreon. Whether it was to buy us a beer or contribute to upgrading our camera equipment, it all makes a huge difference to our ability to continue sharing this adventure.